Good evening, students. Welcome back. So today we are going to pick up this new topic, and I would say quite important as far as the audit firm is concerned. So, like you talk about a company, okay? So, for a company, when you talk about its SOPs, means in terms of the policies and procedures which are discussed. So, why are those important? Because every organization will have some objectives, and they try to achieve their objectives by setting up some framework, you can say some policies and procedures are set out which will help that entity achieve its objectives over a period of time. So whether it's about the short term, medium term, or the long term, and something which we very commonly refer to as, you can say, the SOPs, which is also about the process in an organization, and how the process is required to function. Okay, means if a particular set of activity has to take place, so how's that really required to be executed? Yeah. Now, for an organization, when you go and audit this entity, now this is generally considered to be a very important element. Yes or no? Why? Because once you have the understanding of the entity, once you understand all of these aspects about the entity, that's when you plan your audit. Why? Because that's how you will get to have an understanding, or you can say a clarity about the business, a clarity about the way the organization wants to function. So, is it really important to understand? We can say yes. And in fact, this is essential. Yeah. Now, what we are going to do today is we are, you can say, sort of going to replicate this aspect in relation to an engagement firm, or you can say a professional firm or an audit firm. Now, actually, we are not talking about a company today. You can say to a great extent. So, when you talk about a firm, we are going to discuss about those firms which are involved in attestation. You can say in a very simple manner, which are involved in audits. Now, for such organizations, means for such professional firms, do we need SOPs? Answer is yes. Why? Because that is also an organization in a way, comprising of various personnel who will have different roles to play within the organization. Some of them might be working for the clients in terms of the audits. You can say some of those are going to be involved in terms of the field work, something which you also call as they are going to face the client directly. Then there is another set of persons who may not be involved in the client facing roles. They are very much a part of the organization. Okay. But in relation to ensuring that the firm is working in an appropriate manner. So what is going to be the appropriate manner for a firm? Firm is able to achieve the quality. Yes or no? Quality in respect of various services it will render. Yeah. So we can say we can have different sets of employees who are working within a professional firm. And what is a common cause towards which they are all working? It's about quality. Yes or no? Yeah. So that's why we can say that quality is again a very important ingredient. Now, particularly if you look at it from the perspective of a professional firm, Okay. Now, for a professional firm, what is it that the personnel are going to render? So they are going to render services to the clients. So if you talk about audit, audit is what? Audit is again nothing but a service. Yes or no? So a professional firm is not going to get some goods or going to get purchased goods which are then sold off. No, it's all about services. And in respect of those services which are rendered, what do they want? They will always want to have the highest level in terms of the quality. Yes or no? Now, how do you achieve that? So you can say you will work in an appropriate manner, you will apply all the audit procedures, okay, and you will also take a right set of personnel. Yeah, so some of these thoughts will come to your mind. Yes or no? So if let's suppose you have to achieve quality, what do you do? Some of these things you will be considering, you will be working on, which is right. And that's why you can say we have a couple of standards that we are going to discuss today. First one talks about quality control for a professional firm. So you can say this SQC one. So this is all about ensuring the quality control for the professional firms. In relation to what? In relation to, of course, we are talking about the audit here. Yeah. Now, how do you achieve that? What is required to be done by the professional firm? Now, every time we may say that it's up to the entity, means up to the professional firm to look into this aspect, to plan this, as to how do they achieve this? Yes or no? So that's a thought we will consider, which is no doubt true. A professional firm will also have its own thought process, will have its own policies, procedures, way of achieving the highest level in terms of the quality for the services it renders. But at the same time, we also have a standard, right? Now, what does the standard require? This standard talks about some of the elements which a professional firm needs to consider. Why? To ensure this quality control. Okay. Now, when you look at it in terms of its application, so the question may arise that what do you have in terms of this SQC1? See, this SQC1 is all about, you can say, in a very broad manner, policies and procedures which a firm needs to follow. So actually, when you are looking at this standard, you are not talking about a particular audit engagement. Say there is a company for which the audit is going on. So can we say that this standard is going to apply to that? Indirectly, yes. Why? Because over here, we are not talking about the individual audits. Over here, we are not talking about each engagement. When you are talking about SQC, so basically it's all about the firm as a whole, right? Some of the things which the firm is required to follow. And that's why you can say firm is not only required to follow for some of the things it will do internally. Because actually, what is the work of the firm? To render services, right? Now, similar to this, when I say similar, I'm just talking about this quality control. we have this auditing standard SA 220. Okay. Now, what does it require? Again, it talks about quality control. Quality control in relation to what? Audit. But when we are looking at SA 220, so in this case, actually we are not talking about a firm. We are talking about the engagement team and the working of the engagement team in relation to a particular audit. Yeah. So you can say that's a broad difference that you'll have in relation to these two standards. Though it may appear as if, you may be thinking that when it's all about quality control, so why do we have two standards? So that's the rationale. Because SQC1 is all about a professional firm. It's all in relation to an audit firm as a whole. Yes, that's the most important. But when it comes to SA 220, so it's something which is in relation to a particular audit. Or you can say in relation to a particular engagement. Right? Now, we will also try to get into some details as around this SQC1 versus SA220. But first of all, let's try to understand about this SQC1. Okay, so that's how we are going to begin, and that's what we are going to pick up first. Now, SQC1 talks about quality control for firms as a whole. Which firms? Which are involved in audits, which are involved in reviews or assurance or related service engagements. Okay, so basically we are talking about attestation in a way, right? Now, as we discussed, we can just break down this SQC1 into few components, into few parts. So basically you can say there are a few elements which this SQC talks about, and for every professional firm, what is required? Adherence is required in respect of those elements. Yeah. So the systems and procedures which the which the professional firm will have. I mean, I'm using the term entity, but please understand that's going to be in the context of professional firm. Yeah, so the systems and procedures which a professional firm is going to have should be in line with what this SQC requires, number one. Plus, that should include all these aspects of SQC1. Means all these elements which the SQC1 talks about have to be incorporated there. Yeah. So that's how you are going to look at it. Now, what are those elements? Let's try to first of all run through some of these elements, and then we'll get on to the details of these elements. First, leadership responsibilities. See, generally there is a saying, or you would have heard this quite a lot, that for a particular system to run in an effective manner, or you can say for a policy to be laid out and then eventually implemented in a manner it becomes effective, what is essential? The top management. They are also following that. Yeah, something which you call as tone at the top. So what does it mean? The leadership, they need to understand as to what is required to be done to ensure quality. Means it's all about responsibilities of the leadership of the professional firm to ensure what? Quality, right? Now, all of these elements we'll discuss one by one in detail. Then we have this ethical requirements. See, the nature of engagements which a professional firm will get into, okay, and which we are discussing over here is what? Audit. Yes or no? And for the audit, you can say there is a principal requirement. It's the core. It's the base. When you talk about ethical requirements. Yeah. So that will set the base. It's very, very important to have the base right. Only and only when we have the base right, we can say that firm is working towards the objectives, okay, in line with what is really required to be done. And similarly, we have some elements in relation to engagement performance, in relation to accepting a client, in relation to monitoring of some of these aspects or some of these elements, you can say. Plus, because the professional firm is all about people, so that's why HR becomes a very important function within a professional firm. Why? Because there are a lot of things which are connected to HR. Yeah. So that's why it's very, very important to consider all of these aspects. Okay. Now, so now what I'll do is I'll get on to each of these elements one by one. And we'll try to first of all understand what does it require and what a firm is supposed to do and practically as to how the things really work. Okay. And you can also say that in a way, if a firm were to, let's suppose, apply this. Now let me just open a document. Just give me a minute. I'll just open this document. I'll just share this now. So this is something we may call as a checklist for SQC1. Yeah. Now, what is this checklist all about? See, idea is to just give you a perspective. If let's suppose a firm were to consider the requirements of SQC1, apply all of these requirements of SQC1. Okay. So therein, what do they need to consider? And how do they actually go about it? Right. So that's where at times you may see a firm is practically considering the documentation in respect of what? Evaluation of SQC1. As to, how do you set up the basis and also its implementation. And one way to achieve that could be in the form of having this checklist. So you can say it's a kind of checklist which is available to a professional firm, basis which they can ensure that each and every aspect of SQC1 is taken care of by the professional firm. By because it's a standard. Yeah. And we understand the standards are mandatory. Yes or no? Standards are mandatory for a professional firm. So, how do they apply this? And while applying that, they need to ensure that nothing is left out. Correct? So, let me just flip through this. So, basically, in this checklist, what will you have? Various requirements of SQC1 have been put down. Para by para, you can see this. Okay. I'm just trying to give you a perspective of how this really works. Now, as against each and every requirement, if you'll find, you'll see you have this para 3, para 4, para 5. Then the column or the documentation talks about a reference of the document, which means that if, let's suppose, the firm says that I have established a system of quality control. Okay, so that's only a verbal thing. So how do you know it's in place? You'll need to have some document. Something has to be in place, right? So that's where you bring in the document reference. So what a firm can do is they can create a document corresponding to this. Yeah, and give the reference over here. So that it's not only something which is a kind of checklist saying yes or no, but that's also available in a form which is really required to be put in place. Okay. Now, in this case, basically, when we are talking about the document reference, so you can say it's all about having a proper set of documentation. Correct. Now, let's suppose something is required by SQC. Okay, now let me just read this first part. Okay, related to, say, leadership. Yeah. So I'm just moving on to the first element. As we discussed, there are various elements within this. Let's suppose if we talk about leadership. Now, in relation to leadership, what do you have? Let's read this para. Okay. Yes, sorry. I'll just share back this document now. It says the firm should establish policies and procedures designed to promote. Now, this is an important part. Firm should establish policies and procedures designed to promote an internal culture based on the recognition that the quality is essential in performing engagements. Such policies or procedures should require chief executive officer or the managing partner of the firm to assume the responsibility for the system of quality control within the firm. Okay, now that's what is required to be done. Now let's suppose if one were to comply with the requirement of this particular para, or you can say this particular requirement of SQC1, if one has to really look into it. So what can the professional firm do about it? Very simply, they can frame a policy for this. Yes or no? So the firm can have a policy document for this. Correct. It may be a detailed laid out policy wherein some of these requirements will be specified. Okay. Now, if any were to follow any of these requirements, so what can they do? They can go and refer, let's suppose there's a database of the firm, okay, wherein this policy is available. So anybody who's a part of the firm, what can they do? They can go read the policy of the firm. Yes, yeah. Similarly, what can also happen is this policy may also be distributed to the employees. Correct. Now here comes the problem. See, to have a policy in place, or let me just rephrase this. Just to have a policy in place, do you think that will be sufficient? Or is that really the intent of the standard? That the professional firm should go draft a policy, document it, okay? Maybe a nicely worded policy which is documented, available to its employees as and when they require. Undoubtedly, yes, that's the requirement of the standard. But at the same time, what does the standard want? Standard wants that this policy should not only be on a piece of paper. Means this should also be implemented within the organization. Yes or no? Yeah. Why? Because only and only when it is implemented, you can say that's when it will serve the required purpose. Okay. Now, with this, in a way, we have talked about two principles. And if you go back to the audit of financial statements of a company, when you talk about IFC in particular, when you talk about control framework in particular, there again we have a similar sort of consideration. What is that? Design and operating effectiveness of the controls. Yes or no? There again you have this requirement. As an auditor, what do you go and check? Do you only go and check the design therein? Answer is no. You also check whether the control is operating in an effective manner or not. Why? Because you understand that just by having a design doesn't serve the purpose. Yes or no? So does it really serve the purpose? Answer is no, it doesn't really serve the purpose. So that's why what do you need? You also need to have in place something which you call as its implementation. So same goes with this SUC as well. Okay, so you can just also maybe try to establish a connect that whenever we are talking about any aspect of the SQC, basically we are going to talk about two things. One is, of course, design, which has to be in place. Which has to be in place, right? And over and above this design, what do we need? It's implementation. Correct? Because without the implementation, if let's suppose we have a design, does it really help us? Answer is no. Okay. So let me just get on to a working file, and therein we'll now try to discuss all of these elements one by one. Now let's get on to this working file. Just give me a minute. So let's talk about all of these elements one by one. Yeah. So the first element, and I think you'll also be able to get onto this understanding that for any policy procedure, what do we need? We need the leadership to take a first step. So that's where this SQC also talks about leadership. So basically, it's all about leading from the front. Something which is expected to be done by the organization. Okay. Something which you will expect an organization to do. Or in an organization, what do you have? You have this leadership. Then the leadership will have, you can say there are going to be some departmental heads. Okay, leadership is all about, let's suppose, the managing partner. And then you'll have various personnel who are working within the organization. Yes or no? Now, what if these personnel are following some of the systems processes, but when you go look at the leadership, they are not able to do that. If let's suppose they are not really concerned, they are not really following some of those practices. So what will happen? A wrong communication, a wrong messaging gets passed on to the, you can say, the lower level. Yes or no? Yeah. But if let's suppose, say the employees who are there in the organization, let's suppose there are some managers, there are some interns, okay, there are some assistant managers, there are some executives. They understand that anything which is required to be done, say in relation to a particular part of the audit, that is of very, you can say leadership has a great focus on that. Let's suppose if they have an understanding about this, and this understanding is sort of passed on to those personnel, okay, to all of those personnel. By whom? By the leadership itself. Let's suppose they have been providing these messages directly. So do you think it will really have an impact on the behavior, on the way the employees will be working within the organization? Answer is yes. achieve the quality control has to be the responsibility of whom? The one who is the managing partner in a way. Yeah, it's for them to look into. It's for them to go and check as to what is really required to be done. So how do they ensure this? Now a question may arise that if, let's suppose, this is really required to be done, leadership has to look into this. It's the responsibility of leadership. So what is it they need to do? Yeah, so the next question will arise. So what do they need to do? How do they really go about it? Or what will demonstrate that leadership is committed towards the quality in relation to the audits? So there are some ways it can always happen. See, an employee joins the professional firm today. So what do you find? There's generally an induction program. Yeah. If, let's suppose, at the time of induction, this employee doesn't only receive the policies and procedures, but also receives, say, an understanding of these policy procedures. Let's suppose there's a module, there's a training session, there's an induction session, which talks about some of those requirements, which is a very important area which the firms believes, okay, it's employees to follow. So what will happen? From the very beginning, employee will get an understanding as to what is really the focus of the firm. Let's suppose at the time of the induction, the leaders, see, the senior partners of the firm, they are having a communication with the new joinees. They are helping the new joinees understand as to why the adherence of some of these policies and procedures is very essential for the organization. So you can say that's how they will be able to demonstrate. Yes or no? Similarly, you can say training programs can be conducted for the employees, right? And when such training programs are conducted for the employees, what do? You may say at that point of time, while the training programs are conducted, there can also be the training programs as regards some of these requirements, which can then be passed on to the employees. Yeah. See, the important thing is what? Important thing is a communication. Right? So this communication is very, very important. And this communication has to flow from the top. Of course, there are going to be various levels of the organization which will keep talking about some of these requirements, and you can always say there is a document which is available which all the employees can go read. In fact, it's mandatory for them to go read. But all of those things are, you can say, all of those things are going to become more productive, sort of, if the leadership of the firm is having a regular sort of communication channel with the employees, wherein such communication is passed on to the employees. Yes or no? So that's why it's a very, very important aspect for one to look into. Right? Now, talking about this leadership, what we will do is we'll just talk about this aspect of this checklist only. Now, if you go back, if you look at some of the requirements of this SQC, okay, as to what does it really want the leadership to look into. So let's try to get through some of the points. So as we discussed, the firm's leadership and the examples it sets significantly influence the internal culture of the firm. So basically, it's all about bringing a culture wherein the people are thinking about ensuring quality. So what is really required to be the focus area? Quality. So the employees should be working towards the quality at all places. Yeah. So the employees are considering to perform the work that complies with professional standards, regulatory and legal requirements. Why? Because what do you mean by quality? So quality doesn't mean anything special is required to be. Quality is all about ensuring what the standards have maintained. Yes or no? Right? Say you are auditing a financial statement. So what is it that you are working for? It's all about expressing an opinion. Yes or no? So basically, in such a situation, it's all about expressing an opinion. Right? Now, in such a situation, what has to be the endeavor of the engagement team? That this opinion they need to ensure is appropriate. And accordingly, they are working. So you can say all of this will happen to be a what? A sort of backward working. To achieve what? To achieve a situation wherein the opinion is appropriate given the circumstance. Right? Now, generally, you will see that such type of communications, when you talk about these days in particular, there are various ways through which such communications are made. Maybe the emails are sent out, say on a monthly basis, highlighting some of the aspects related to the quality control which the firm wants the employees to follow. And these are sent out by whom? By the senior partners, by the managing partner. Okay. So that is again one of the aspects to be considered. Okay. Now, moving further. Now we will move on to the next element of the SQC1. See, over here, in a way, we are talking about the ethical requirements. Okay. So when we talk about the ethical requirements, so what do we have? As we discussed, the nature of engagement is what? It requires an auditor. Let's suppose there's an auditor. to first of all be eligible for the engagement. Yes or no? That's how you'll always start. Forget about performing the work. Before you perform, what do you need to check? And it's a necessity. Is it a choice? No, it's a necessity. That are you really eligible? Therein, you will look at various aspects, including the one that you consider as independence. Yes or no? In fact, we have some fundamental principles in relation to what? Professional ethics. When you talk about objectivity, integrity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, professional behavior, all of these are what? All of these are nothing but the fundamental principles of professional ethics. Where do they come from? Of course, the code of conduct, yeah, which is mandatorily required to be followed, right? Now, in this case, let's talk about independence. Now, independence is important. It's essential. Why? Because only and only when you are independent, you will be able to achieve the quality. Why? Because otherwise, when you are biased, okay, so how do you ensure quality? Yes or no? Now comes the point that for this independence, what is really required to be done? Yes or no? So now please remember, in relation to SQC, we are basically talking about what? We are basically talking about the firm level requirements. Okay. So therefore, when it comes to the independence, what is required to be done? For independence, it's required to be ensured that the personnel of the organization are independent. Yes or no? Right? So how do you achieve that? So there's a mechanism. Now through this mechanism, what should the firm do? As and when an employee will join, employee will give a declaration that employee is independent in relation to the engagements of the firm. And there are some parameters to ensure independence. Plus, on an annual basis, firm needs to ensure that this independence is evaluated. So what will the firm do in such a case? You can say there will be a declaration sort of, which is called as annual independence declaration. By the employees of the firm, right? This is something which is required to be put in place. So that becomes essential for the firm. So that's how they will achieve, or you can say that's how they will be reaching this level. On the top of it, now as we discussed, this is only a design, and you can say by obtaining the declaration, we are also ensuring its implementation. Correct. We are ensuring its implementation. Correct. But when you talk about some types of declaration like this, so who is giving the declaration? It's the employee. Yeah. So employee is giving a declaration in relation to his or her independence. Now, what if that declaration is not correct? Is that a possibility? So you may say it's a remote possibility, but it's a risk. It could be there. Yeah. What if it's wrong? So it's a threat to the independence. Yeah. And that's why this is considered to be an extremely important area. And that's why you can say that over and above this design and its implementation in a way we discussed, a monitoring is also required. Now, what do you mean by monitoring? And what do you do really in terms of monitoring this? See, by monitoring, what can the firm do, or what should be the system of the firm in relation to that? Say an organization has got 50 employees who have given this declaration. Yeah. So for some of those employees, something that you call as sample when it comes to the audit. So we are talking about sample only. What should the firm do? Firm should go and check whether that declaration is correct or not by obtaining the supporting documents from the employees. Yeah, correct. Why? Because if there is any breach of independence, that's how the firm will also be able to get to know. You can say that will be the mechanism of the firm to reach that stage. Otherwise, how will the firm get to know about it? Will they be able to get to know about it? Answer is no. Okay. Otherwise, what will happen? You can say there could be a challenge. Maybe out of these 50 employees, say 40 have given the declaration. The remaining 10 have not given the declaration. So for 10 who have not given, there again, monitoring is required whether all have given or not. If they have not given, there has to be a mechanism to follow up with them to ensure there is no exception. Yes or no? Right? So that's why you can say that some of these areas, in terms of their design and in terms of their implementation, are important. But on the top of it, what do you require? You will also require a mechanism to monitor. Because if that is not done, then there is a possibility that even though it's getting executed, but maybe the execution is wrong, or maybe there are errors over there, right? And which can have a huge impact on the organization, on the professional firm. Yeah. So that's why this independence is considered to be an extremely important area for any professional firm. And that's where, if you talk about any professional firm, you will see there is a huge focus of the firm, not only at the policy level in terms of having a policy in place, but also in terms of ensuring that some of these things are actually executed. All of these things are actually put in place, right? Yeah. So basically, we are talking about its implementation alongside. Okay. Its implementation alongside. Right? Clear on this? Next. Now, if you talk about some of the requirements related to the independence, okay, of course, monitoring is one piece we have just looked at. Now we will talk about this another element, something that you call as client acceptance and client continuance. Now, what do you mean by this? So let's first of all understand as to what do you mean by client acceptance and client continuance. Okay. Now let me just again go back to this working file. Let's suppose there's a firm, PQR and company. So they were the auditor of a company, ABC Limited, say for 24-25. So they were the auditor of this company, right? Now for this period 25-26, okay, let's suppose the company has reached out to another firm. Say it's about M&O and company. So now we are talking about M&O. Now for M&O, audit of financial statements for this 25-26, you can say it will be a new audit. Yes or no? This client, ABC Limited, is also new to M&O. So you may say, but what if they have a relationship, they know in the past years, which is fine. But as far as the audit is concerned, for audit purposes, it's a new thing, right? So in this case, this SQC requires that for this M&O, before they really accept, so we are not talking about the audit right now. So we are talking about the acceptance of this audit. So there will be a process which the firm and company will be required to follow. So the company will reach out to the audit firm, and the audit firm will respond, yes, the audit firm is interested in performing the audit. And then, of course, the professional firm will also share the eligibility consent letter. Now, that is what we are discussing here. For this period 25-26, because MNO is accepting the engagement. Acceptance means getting into a new engagement. That's why what should it do? It should evaluate whether it will be appropriate for MNO to accept this engagement or not. Now you may be thinking that why will that be a consideration? Why would they not want? Because they will want more and more companies to come, more and more clients to come. Answer is yes. But over here, we are not talking about sale of goods. We are talking about rendering of such services which are restricted. Okay. And before you get into those services, you need to ensure that there is no risk which is attached to that. Yeah, so this risk evaluation. Now, some of the things you will consider as an auditor. So the background of the company, background of the promoters, of the directors, of the KMPs. So because you are actually getting into a risk evaluation. So how do you achieve that? That's how you will achieve it. Yeah, that's how you will get into its evaluation. Correct. So that's why it's very, very important for you to look into some of those aspects which can have a bearing on the audit later on. Because today, if you accept it, as an auditor, you need to understand the risk which are going to arise. So as an auditor, you need to evaluate that. Yeah. Because when you evaluate it, basis which you will do, that will become the documentation for this element of the SQC in relation to that particular engagement, of course. Yeah, so this is something that you call as client acceptance. Okay. So this is what you would call as client acceptance. Now, let me just extend this a bit further. Yeah. Now, let's suppose audit for 25-26 is completed. See, MNO does all the evaluation, they find everything to be okay, they perform the audit, it's all done, closed, and over. Now, in this case, what will happen? For the next year, 26-27, will this audit be required to be performed again? Answer is yes. Now, as of now, we are considering that for this audit to be performed next year, what will happen? Once again, an evaluation will be required, right? An evaluation will be required as to who will perform the engagement. Let's suppose the company wants to continue with MNO, and you may be thinking, but there's always a block period, 5 years. Yes, of course, it's all in place, but it's not a mandate. You can always change that. We are now talking about a situation wherein it's been going on, it's been continuing. Now, in this situation, as an auditor, what have you done? You have performed the audit for 25-26. During the course of audit, you would have come across certain issues. You would have evaluated the risk. Now, with all of these things which are executed, next year, the audit team will again need to evaluate about what the client is accepted, but do they really continue with the client? Do they really continue with the engagement? Yeah. So now you may be thinking that how is it different from the acceptance? I would say not much, except for the fact that 1 year is now already audited by the same audit firm, or you can say at least 1 year. Right? In which situation? In case of client continuance. And that's where, as an auditor, you may be thinking that no, considering the risk involved, it will not be appropriate for you to continue as an auditor. Yeah. So this evaluation of client continuance as well as the client acceptance needs to be again documented by the audit team. And this is nothing but a part of the policy of the professional firm. So can we say it's going to be engagement specific? Answer is yes. It will be required to be done for the engagement, but to do this for the engagement, you can say we have this SQC. So this SQC will require, it's required to be done for each and every audit engagement, or each and every engagement will fall under the purview of this SQC. Understood? Now, some of the elements which you will generally get to see when it comes to this client continuance, client acceptance. Now, what are those areas which you will want to consider? So let's look at some points. See, as a firm, they need to have the policies and procedures, right? Wherein, if they want to take up the engagement, if they want to continue with the engagement, so what do they check? Wherein the firm would have considered the integrity of the client, and they do not have any information that would lead it to conclude that the client lacks integrity. Yeah, you can say some of the very basic aspects which anyways you will want to consider. Yes or no? Wherein the firm also needs to consider whether they are competent to this, competent for this work. Will they have the capability? Will they have the time, resources? So let's try to understand. Say A company has reached out, ABC Limited has reached out to PQR and company. Around what? Around audit of its financial statements. Now, in this case, what will happen? Audit for this 25-26 needs to be completed, say, by 31st May. So that's the requirement of ABC. Now, PQR, let's suppose, considering the staff strength it has, say they will remain occupied during this period. And if they pick up this engagement, what will happen? They will be short of staff. So will they be able to deliver quality? That's a question mark, right? Another way to look at it is, let's suppose this ABC Limited, say, is in a business of telecom. Let's suppose they are into telecom. Now, to audit this particular sector or the companies of this sector may also require some sort of technical expertise as around this particular industry as well. Without which, what do? You may end up ignoring some of the key aspects related to the audit, which are connected to the business understanding. At times, that is possible. Now, who will evaluate this? Again, it's for the professional firm to evaluate. Right? Yeah. Now, all of these considerations are important. Why? Because it will have a bearing on what? On the outcome of the audit. And that is what the standard strives for, quality control. Yeah. So it's all about ensuring the quality is there. Right? Next. HR. Now let's talk about this HR. Because when it comes to this HR, that is where I've seen a lot of confusion also arising. Now, what is the confusion and what is really required over here? And to a certain extent, we can say this HR is an important piece. It can also form the core. If the organization is really considering these requirements in an appropriate manner. Now, what is that? So let's try to understand. Okay. So first of all, let's try to understand what is the subject matter of discussion. And you may be thinking that so far we have been discussing about audit mainly. Or let me just put it in a very simple manner. We are only talking about rendering a service. Yes or no? Now, who are going to be involved in rendering the service? Employees of the professional firm. Correct. So that's why if the quality has to be delivered, which is the end objective, which is actually the objective towards which we have been having so much discussion. So where does this quality come from? It's going to come from the people. Yes or no? That's where the quality has to come from. Now, now let's think about some of the ways or some of the requirements as well, which are essential. You may say, first of all, if you look at it from the perspective of the professional firm, they need to think through about recruitment process. Why? Because they need to think about the people they want to hire, the quality of the people they want to have in place, what set of people they want to have to achieve what? To achieve this quality, right? So this recruitment process will first of all get the organization to what? Get the organization to have the people who have the skill set. Yes or no? Now the other piece you can say is about various requirements which the people will have. Now, for a person or for an employee, or let's suppose for a member of the engagement team, it's not only about recruitment, or you can't say that when you recruit, you have got the best person. See, the person will have to be groomed at times, person will have to be trained in accordance with the requirements of the firm, because every firm can have their own specific requirements, own specific ways of doing the work. Yes or no? So, how will a person get to know? That's where some of these requirements related to training become essential. Training in respect of employees of the organization, wherein the people are trained about what? About the professional standards, about the way they conduct. Yeah, because eventually they happen to be the part of the organization. Their conduct will reflect the conduct of the firm they are representing. Yes or no? Yeah. So that's where this piece is an important consideration. Now, similarly, you can say, let's suppose when the people are engaged, so they will also have some expectations. Okay? They will also be need to be evaluated in a constructive manner in respect of the projects they have executed. Let's suppose a limited review has been completed, say for a particular period. So it's a project. The team which was deputed on this project, yeah, so this team needs to be you can say provided with the evaluation, something that you call as appraisal framework, wherein the improvement areas are discussed, wherein the strengths are highlighted, right? Yeah, so it's all about ensuring that any constructive feedback which is there is passed on to help achieve what? To help achieve the development of the employee. Yes or no? Yeah. Similarly, some of these considerations in relation to the promotion, the compensation which you give to the employees, these are again essential. Why? Because your objective is what? That the person has to stay motivated, right? Within the framework which the person is required to work upon, how do you really motivate? Okay, what is the career development mechanism? What is the career progression mechanism? So all of these considerations are very, very important. Why? Because ultimately it's the people who are going to work on the projects. Yes or no? And that's where this function, something that you call as HR, becomes important. So that needs to play a very important role in achieving all of these. Why? Because if you don't achieve this as an organization, what do you have? Do you really going to have the right set of people? Answer is no. Without which, do you think you will be able to achieve the objective of ensuring the quality in such a case? The answer is no. So that's why it's very, very important for organization to consider all of these requirements. Yeah. Next. See, generally, what do you find? So this is something you'll practically get to see in respect of almost every organization. And again, for an organization to reach a quality uh, criteria which is established, what will happen? You can say an evaluation is required. So let's try to understand this. Let me just get onto this working file. This is also something that you call as estimation as well as allocation. Now, what do you mean by that? Estimation and allocation. Okay, let's try to understand this with the help of an example. Say during this financial year 26-27, now we are planning for 26-27. So this is the financial year we have. Now during this financial year, what will you do? You will be performing the audit for various companies' financial statements, say for 25-26. So you can say 25-26 the period under audit. Okay. And I am just for the purposes of our requirements considering as if all of these audits of various companies. Now let's think about a professional firm. So professional firm may not be auditing only one company. Let's suppose they are auditing 50 companies. Okay. We are talking about 50 audits. So when are they required to be completed? Say by 30th September 2026. What is the period under audit? So this is the period under audit. So what is the time frame we have? So this is the time frame we have as a firm. right? Now let's suppose this firm has a staff of 30 persons, all inclusive. So some of them are experienced chartered accountants, some of them are fresh chartered accountants, some of them are articles. Yeah. So you can say it's a mixed pool which is available. Now for this firm, if we go back to the requirement that we had, quality control is required for what? All the engagements. Can we say the firm can selectively do this for, say, 10 engagements or top 10? No. It has to be ensured throughout. Yes or no? The firm can't say that some of the large clients I'll ensure that. No. Now, for achieving this, what should the firm do? An estimation, planning, an allocation of the work, of the staff. Planning of what? Which audit to be performed at what time? Because every time the audit is performed, okay, they will need some of the people to be deputed. And at every point of time, they may not have the excess staff available. Maybe within the staff which is available, they need to manage. Yeah? So how do they manage? So which period they pick up which audits? Okay, how many persons are required over there? So will there be any time periods, let's suppose, any time period which are going to be the peak periods, let's suppose, during which 30 persons are not going to be sufficient. So the firm may have to hire, let's suppose, 15 more. Yes or no? So all of these questions firm needs to first of all look into. Yeah, this is something which will also be a planning of resources and allocation, planning of audits. Why? Because if there's a shortage, will the firm be really able to perform the audit? Forget the quality. Answer is no. So the quality is going to get impacted. Plus, out of these 30, it's not only about deputing the people, it's about deputing the right person for the right job. Yes or no? Deputing the right person for the right job. And how do you achieve that? When you get into this estimation. Why? Because when you will have this estimation in place, that's when you will get to know about it, whether some of these things are really in place or not. Right? So that's why it's very, very important for the organization to look into these aspects as well. Right? Now, moving further. Let's talk about the next element, which is about engagement performance. Now, in terms of engagement performance, basically it's about looking at the particular engagement. And some of the things in terms of the engagement performance is what the engagement team needs to ensure. So what are the things they will check? First of all, do they have a proper planning? Yes or no? Is the firm having the right set of procedures, policies in respect of each and every engagement team? Is the resource allocation done in an appropriate manner? Means, is the engagement really having the adequate staff plus the right staff for the job? Let's suppose three persons are required, only two are deputed, or let's suppose five are required, but they do not have the skill set which is required for that particular industry. So all of these considerations are important. Now, how will this work be managed over there? Who is going to look into what? Because when you talk about the engagement performance, it's not only about going and performing the procedures. There has to be someone within the engagement team who will be guiding the other members or maybe the junior members as and when required. Plus, will also be reviewing their work. You can say monitor or supervise their work. So that wherever any sort of deviation is there, it can be fixed on time. Right? Because it's not only about delivering the quality, but it's all about delivering the quality within the time frame. Yeah. So all of these aspects related to the engagement performance, which anyways for each and every engagement you will check, you will evaluate. So there are a lot of things you will get into the audit of the financial statements. I'm not really repeating each and every point, but this evaluation is required to be done. Because if that is not done, then it can have a huge impact on the outcome of the engagement, on the outcome of the audit. Right? So that's why it is something which forms again the core of the engagement performance. Okay. Now, sometimes, now again, it's a very specific situation at times, but it can be very important consideration for the engagement team. Sometimes what may happen is, say there are some critical matters, there are some complex accounting matters, there are some areas wherein significant judgment is required to be made. Okay, so in such a case, what do you do? How do you really go about it as an auditor? Maybe the engagement partner needs to have a second opinion, a view. Some consultation is required. So the firm needs to have a mechanism for doing that. Something that you call as consultation mechanism. So what is the consultation mechanism of the firm? In relation to difficult or contentious matters. Right? Because there again, what will happen? The concerned team or the system which has been put in place needs to be followed by the firm and its personnel in an appropriate manner. Some time frame will have to be looked at in such a case. Right? There should not be any deviation from that. So that's how you achieve the standardization also. Otherwise, each and every engagement team may be reaching out to someone or maybe reaching out to, say, a platform which may not be consistent with the requirements which the firm may have established. Correct? Next. Now, this is again one important area of consideration. See, the firm needs to have a mechanism. Mechanism about what? mechanism about a difference of opinion. Say for a particular audit of financial statements, say there's an engagement partner, right? And there is EQCR, engagement quality control review. Now, both of them are important for an audit. Yes or no? Both of them are important. Now, it may happen that in relation to, say, a particular matter, in relation to a particular conclusion, they have a difference of opinion. Yes or no? Possible or not? Say within the firm, both of them are working. So we are not saying it's a third party or it's a personal of the client who is having a difference of opinion. No, two persons can always have a difference of opinion. Yeah. So now in this case, what do you do as a firm? Now, can we say that because it's going to be signed by the engagement partner, so eventually whatever engagement partner decides, that will go through? Yes or no? But these are some very practical situations which may arise. Okay. Now, if let's suppose such situations arise, both of them happen to be the part of the organization. Yeah. So what do they need to do? They need to follow the same mechanism. Let's suppose there's a third partner who has been deputed for such type of conflicts which may arise at times, or such type of situations in an independent manner, of course. Why? Because that is again a mechanism which the firm would have established to ensure such things are taken care of. Yes or no? Yeah. Otherwise, what will happen? Otherwise, this will get into a situation which will lead to a conflict and which will eventually get into a situation wherein the quality of the engagement gets impacted. Now, talking about EQCR. Now, what do you mean by EQCR? So you can say EQCR is what? A personnel who is deputed in respect of specific engagements. And let's talk about public interest entities. So the listed companies in particular, who is going to look at some of the specific areas of the audit. Yeah. So that's the role of the EQCR. But is really the objective? Objective is to, like the terminology suggests, quality control. That's where this another review is required. So we are not saying it's a sort of duplication. It's all about review of what the engagement team has been doing, evaluation of what they have been doing in an independent manner, and also in a way providing a support to them. So that's why this EQCR goes alongside. So it's not that you complete the audit and then you eventually get onto the EQCR. No. Alongside this process goes on. Yeah. And what is it really required for? So all of these are moving into a single direction, and that is what? Quality control. So there are some specified areas which an EQCR will look into. nature of the engagement, identification of unusual circumstances, risks, okay, laws and regulations. Okay, so the firm needs to set out a mechanism as to how the EQCR will be selected. Okay, what are the things he'll need to look into, and what are the parameters? At times, the firm may also have a checklist to be considered. Of course, idea is not really to restrict them in terms of what they are doing, but idea is to enable them, okay, in terms of what is really required to be done. Yeah. So now what we can do is, before we continue, let's take a break, quick break, yeah, and then we'll continue on. So Ashok, we can take a break now. Let's make, yeah, sure. Okay, so now moving on to the other requirement. Documentation plays a very important role. Answer is no. Always be achieved, but any sort of added should not be done. Why? Because within the time frame, something is completed and it's done. So this documentation, if you change that archival and sort of maintaining the documentation in terms of how this is really put into play. For what period this documentation is required to be maintained. It has to be for a minimum period when it's really required, which is also specified. It should be for no shorter than 7 years from the date of the auditor's report, or if later, the date of the group auditor's report. Yeah, so that's the requirement you will get to see. Okay, now if at all there are any disputes, there are any conflicts, there are any cases around which some of these files are being referred, then this minimum period needs to be considered as if it's minimum. So there's no capping to that. In such a case, it's required to be preserved even for a longer period of time. And as around this documentation, this is extremely important to ensure that it's retained, and it's not only retained, it's also retained in a manner that it's also something which is now done and no sort of editing is possible. If at all, let's suppose later on for any reviews, this is required to be picked up. So what is the mechanism, how it will be accessed? So all of these things need to be put into place. Now, moving on to the next, and we can say one of the most important elements. And practically, that is where we find most of the concerns. See, when we talked about this SQC, we discussed there are always three aspects in a way to this. One is the design. See, to have a design is something important. It's quite easy at the same time, because to have a design means what? To ensure its implementation. And for the firm to then go having a mechanism to monitor this. Something that you call as monitoring. When we talk about all of these elements that we have discussed so far, they are all required to be monitored. Okay. Let me just give you one example for this. So let's go back to again this file. So at times, again, this may be known by different names across the professional firms. Say reviews of the engagements. Now, what do you mean by that? Sometimes at places you get to see the term code review around it. At times you get to see a term practice review around it. What is this review of the engagement? Let's suppose firm. Now, for the requirement related to engagement performance, so the firm has a design that is also implemented, but we also need to monitor as a firm. So that's the responsibility of the firm, to monitor its implementation. What if the engagement was performed, but the quality was not ensured? Maybe the criteria which the firm set out were not followed by the engagement partner or separate individual, generally considered to be the risk partner, or you can say generally considered to be a review partner, may be deputed, who may be looking into the audit files, say for a particular period. For 25-26, all the audits have been completed by the engagement partners. So in 26-27, once the audits are completed, okay, so that's when the audits are completed. That's when the documentation is also closed. Now this is the period when this reviews will be, say, each engagement partner will have one audit file which will be picked up for review by this independent team. Sometimes also cross, any sort of buyers should not creep in, and who will set it up. So again, it's the responsibility of the firm to put this mechanism in place. So this is again something that you call as monitoring of this element. What do we need? We need some of these things to be looked into, right? So just give me a minute. Okay, so there we go. So now what we'll try to do is we'll just try to so I'll just share this document with you of some of these things we are discussing now. Yeah. So it's all about application of some of these things that we have just discussed. Yeah. And we'll also pick up some questions from RTP. Yeah. ABC and Associates Chartered Accountants means it's a professional firm, it's an audit firm. Has a risk evaluation is conducted. So what are we discussing here? Client acceptance given to us. Now XYZ Limited. So now we are talking about a company. You can say a client for this. Okay. Yeah. Of course. So if you talk about this company, so the promoter of the client, or if you can say promoter, is a close associate and family friend of Mr. A. Who is Mr. A? So definitely if they are closely connected, so what will happen? There will be a bias. If you look at it from audit's perspective. Yeah. XYZ hasn't been in the news in the previous year for certain inquiries from the regulatory authorities in relation to certain matters. Yeah. So it appears this company is not clean. Of course, it is not the final evaluation. Existing auditor of XYZ has resigned. Auditor resigns, there's a casual vacancy. 5% more than the existing fees, and has approached ABC and Associates to audit the financial statements. Okay. Those association with the promoter of the company. Plus, the company is also ready to pay a significant. Yeah. So what will happen? You can say these are some of the situations which are reflecting that some sort of influence is involved. Yes or no? So Mr. A has a strong recommendation to the firm to accept the audit in the position of a managing partner. Yes or no? So it's an influential position anyways. What is your understanding of functioning of the tone at the top of the firm, ABC and Associates? Quality of the firm. See, whenever you get questions like this, you need to understand the context. Over here, what is the context? Definitely it's about SQC, but in relation to client acceptance. Means SQC requires what? For a firm to accept a client. A sort of means you don't just go and accept anything which comes your way. Yeah. The firm needs to be wary of some facts. And without the evaluation, acceptance should not be done. Yeah, so that doesn't mean that the firm cannot accept anything. They can, of course, accept. But there has to be a documentation. There has to be some basis of acceptance. If the firm will have a basis of acceptance, which is logical in line with what the professional standards will require, what the legal requirements allow, there is absolutely no problem in doing it. Yes or no? But over here, with the context that we have, we need to look into these questions. We need to look into these requirements. So every time you have questions like this, it's very, very important to, of course, get on to the guidance. But it's also important to link that to the situation or the specific requirement which the question will want you to think. Correct? Because over here, the question is not asking you that what are the procedures you'll follow for the client acceptance. Yeah. So now let's look at this. So as to how do you really go about it? See, the given situation indicate managing partner of Messrs. ABC and Associates, right? Of the proposed client. Previous auditor has resigned and company is offering hike in audit fee. Now this is again important consideration. Huh? So why is the company ready to offer a hike in audit fee? So if a company is ready, there must be some reason behind that. They would always want the cost to go down. If at all, they will engage somebody, and if they want to pay more, they may be paying in line with the market, right? To bring in a hike of 25%, regulatory inquiries against the company. Now that is also very, very important consideration, because there could be something in relation to the operations of the company. There could be something which the company may not be doing. You come across this situation, so definitely you will assume there's a problem. No. But you need to be wary of the fact that in spite of all this, because the managing partner doesn't seem to be considering all of these points. Partner wants the engagement to be accepted. Okay, without the evaluation, of course. Yeah. So if you look at this aspect on the front, in respect of the policies, procedures, in respect of the professional standards which are there, leadership needs to be following that first of all. By doing that, they will set an example. So in this case, if let's suppose the managing partner ignores the fact that the promoter is a close associate and requires the firm to do a proper evaluation, irrespective of the relationship, that doesn't mean that he will not accept the engagement, but he wants that irrespective of whatever be the relationship, we would like this to be evaluated first of all before we accept. So what will happen? What messaging goes out to all the employees across the organization, that the leadership, the top level of the organization, of the professional firm, they are quite focused on achieving the quality control parameters. As of now, in the given situation, what will happen? It will reflect poorly amongst the engagement team members, amongst the people in the organization, amongst the other partners who could be there in the organization. Yes or no? Now, SQC1 requires that the firm establish a system of quality control designed to provide it with reasonable assurance that the firm and its personnel comply with professional standards, legal regulatory requirements. It further requires firm's business strategy is subject to engagements. However, in the given situation, what has happened? Commercial consideration, they are overriding some of these important considerations. Yes or no? Yeah, it's a complete override. Managing partner being a close associate, family, friend seems to be doing that. So the example he is giving, matter should have been brought to the knowledge of the firm in accordance with the requirements of SQC1, as it involves issue of independence of management. You should just set aside, evaluate that. Yes or no? Further, matter of inquiries, uh, sort of authorities are involved. This may be the integrity of the client is questioned, is challenged. Yeah, redrawn. But the point is to reach the conclusion, the process which should have been followed, is the firm really getting onto that process? No. That's where we see this override. Okay, so this override seems to be an issue. It requires firm to consider before acceptance of an engagement that client doesn't lack integrity, or if we have to say such a situation reflects lack of proper establishment of quality top level. That is where it should have existed, right? And that is where it seems to be lacking. Following consideration should be taken into account while upholding the quality of the firm. Now, what are the considerations that we need to have in place? So let's look at this. Quality of work performed. Okay. Firm's policies and procedures in relation to its personnel are designed to demonstrate its overriding commitment to quality. Firm devotes sufficient resources for development, documentation of its quality control policies and procedures, information about the client. Okay. Now, what are the sources? See, these days, a lot of data, a lot of information is available. So easily you can acquire the information. Yeah. So just do a search and you get to see a lot of information. Such an information should help the firm decide about the integrity of the client, promoters, KMP. Yes or no? Yeah. So all of these factors play a very important role, right? Next, let's look into this. Next one. CAM is introduced to a prospective client. In a CAM, very soon in relation to a professional work, right? During the discussions over a cup of coffee next week, it transpires that there was a search by recovery of huge amount of cash. Yeah, so it's a serious concern. Income tax department, now we are also looking at another regulator, had also searched his premises in relation to bogus capital gains on penny stocks. So you can say it appears the company, the client personnel, the client or this prospective client, I should really say that this is a prospective client, they are involved in what? They are involved in set of transactions which don't appear to be legitimate. Yes or no? Yeah. Now, complaining about the poor quality of services provided by his present auditor. Okay, in the given situation, he offers appointment as tax auditor of his 5 family-owned firms to CAM. Okay, and he is also promising to pay a good amount of fee for the same. Yeah, so that's what the client wants CAM to do. Now, in this case, the question arises: what are the factors to be evaluated? Okay, so what are the factors to be evaluated by CAM if he wants to take up the engagement? So now, if you look at this situation, so what do we have? We have a situation wherein the firm is required to evaluate whether they would like to take up the engagement or not. Yes or no? So if you look at it from the perspective of the professional firm, okay. So again, we are looking into the evaluation of what? Client acceptance. Right? As to whether you want to really get into that or not. Yeah. So let's look at this. See, before accepting a new engagement, integrity of the client should be considered, including the matters like we just saw, which have been raised, which appear to be there because of the regulators being involved. Right? So we see a couple of regulators, and of course, none of them could be in relation to some of the things which may not be appropriate as far as the business of the client is concerned. So in the given situation, how do you evaluate that? What is going to be your basis? So that will play a very, very important role. And this needs to be documented also. Yeah. So therefore, will you really want to get into such type of engagement? Will you really want to get into such type of audit, irrespective of the fee that is involved? Answer is no. So therefore, looking at the facts which are available, what is it that you'll want to get into? Offer should not be accepted. Okay. Yeah. Next. RST and Company is a firm of chartered accountants. So they are the auditors of a listed company. And this company is engaged in manufacturing of heavy machinery components. Yeah. Audit report for 23-24. It appears audit for 23-24 is already completed. Also included the report on matters listed in CARO. While reporting under CARO clause 7A relating to regularity of undisputed requirement. So what has happened? Auditor has written something. So what did the auditor write? Company is depositing, still reporting qualitative, number one, and in line with the requirements of SA 220. See, SA 220 is perspective of firm as a whole. So that's how you will go about it, correct? Now, let's look at this. See, such type of reporting is not quality. One of the objectives of the auditor is what? Is to implement quality control procedures at the engagement level that provide the auditor with this CARO and legal requirements in the given situation. Okay. Now, let's look at this next one. PQR and Associates. So they are the auditors, okay, of a listed company. There arose an issue during the course of audit relating to related party transactions. So now here again appears that we are talking about an engagement rather than firm as a whole. So I think this understanding you need to have. So I think now it's a matter related to related party transactions. Okay, of course, it's an audit which is going on, right? Engagement partner wants to consult an EQCR on this matter during the course of audit process itself. See, actually over here, even though we have this sort of situation which is created, I think it's more about the technical guidance. Question is whether this engagement partner can go consult EQCR. Okay, so that's the question. Can he do that? Can he just go consult QCR? Right? So this is something we need to look into. See, for the EQCR, now what do you need to have? For the EQCR, we need to understand as to what the EQCR is really required to have. Okay. Now, what are the things which the EQCR need to have in place? Now, it is necessary to maintain objectivity of the reviewer. Therefore, participation in the engagement or making decisions for the engagement team is to be avoided at all costs. Yes or no? So that's the very, very important requirement for the engagement. Okay. However, engagement partner may consult the EQCR during the engagement so as not to compromise his objectivity and of course eligibility to perform the role. So till the time that sort of, you can say, objectivity is maintained, there is absolutely no problem. So I think so within that context it needs to be looked into, right? So now let's look at this next one. BME and company they are in the midst of audit process of a listed company. So you can say it's an audit which is going on, right? During the audit, an issue arose relating to revenues from contracts with customers in terms of Ind AS. So basically, it's an accounting matter which seems to have come up, right? See, over here we are talking about audit. So that's why you should really be concerned about the technicality of the accounting matter here. Anyways, that is not a subject matter in this question, but even if you talk about any sort of questions, okay, so that sort of situation you shouldn't get into, because the way you should read it is that there's a matter around revenue which has come up. Okay. Now, in this case, engagement partner took a certain stand, which is fine. Of course, engagement partner will take a stand. However, EQCR recommended otherwise. So clearly there is a conflict. Conflict in what sense? There's a difference of opinion, because they are moving into a different direction, sort of. Yeah. And now the question rises, what do you do about it? How should this conflict be resolved? So as we discussed, every time when you have this situation, you need to get on to the context. So over here, we are talking about difference of opinion. Now, as a firm, whether there's a difference of opinion or not, a mechanism for resolving any such difference, whenever that situation arises, yes or no? So that mechanism needs to be in place. Okay. So the firm will do what? So the firm will put down a policy document. Okay. They will specify that if, let's suppose, this is the situation, so where should the engagement partner and EQCR go? So who do they approach? So that this conflict is resolved. Yeah. And something which that you can say team or maybe that personnel who is then appointed or referred to or is required to be referred to will then become, you can say, in a way binding. Why? Because that's how you come out of conflict. You can't be in a situation that he is also a part of the conflict then. Yeah. But then, of course, this will not really get on to the desired objective. Yes or no? Yeah, so that's again a very important consideration while setting up this mechanism. So in case recommendations of EQCR are not accepted by the engagement partner and there's a conflict. So what do you do? Matter should be resolved by following the established procedure which the firm would have established, right? Which may involve consulting with another practitioner or firm or a professional or regulatory body or another partner, maybe managing partner. Yeah. So this is generally you will see in terms of the mechanism which needs to be in place. See, as we discussed, the firm needs to prepare for all of these things by having a mechanism. So it should happen that as and when the situation is arising, that's when the firm is thinking, okay, so this is how we'll resolve. No, that's not SQC then. Because SQC talks about the preset policies and procedures which are there to address the concern. Okay. Next, MBA and Associates. It's a partnership firm of chartered accountants which was established 7 years back. Right. So that's the understanding about the professional firm that we have. Means it's an old firm. Firm is getting new clients. It has also been offered new engagement services with the existing clients. See, there are two things. To get new clients means you are getting new companies. Okay. To get new engagement means, let's suppose you have the same company ABC. ABC gave you the work for say a particular matter. Okay. Then ABC required another service, so they reached out to you. Then ABC required and again another service, they reached out. So for the same company, you are doing differently. So of course, I'm talking about the permissible work. Yeah. So that's what you call as getting a new engagement with the existing clients. Right. So for our consideration, for our evaluation, I don't think this really matters so much. Now let's get into the details. The firm is concerned about obtaining such information as it considers necessary in the circumstances before accepting an engagement with a new client and acceptance of a new engagement with an existing client. So what does it mean? What are the criteria firm will have? What is the mechanism firm will have in relation to what? Client acceptance. Okay. Firm is looking to work with only select clients to adhere to the quality control standards. Of course, it becomes easier. Why? Because when you have this select clients about whom you know quite a lot, you have great insights, wherein you have done a review, this evaluation. So that's where the quality control parameters are already taken care of as far as those clients are concerned. The more and more clients you reach out to, you get involved with them. So you need to get into this evaluation. So no, yeah. But anyways, so the standard is not stopping the company from picking up the new clients. So in the given case, the firm seems to be interested only in working with select clients. You are required to guide the firm about the matters to be considered with regard to integrity of a client. Okay, as per SQC. Now, as per SQC 1, firm should obtain such information as it considers necessary in the circumstances before accepting an engagement with a new client, when deciding whether to continue an existing engagement, and when considering acceptance of a new engagement with an existing client. Okay. Where the issues have been identified. Issues means any sort of concern. And the firm decides to accept or continue the client relationship or a specific engagement, it should document as to how those issues were resolved. Very important. With regard to the integrity of a client, you do matters that the firm considers. Now, what are those? Let's look at that. Identity and business reputation of the client's principal owners, KMP, related parties, TCWG, which is about the board of directors. Okay. Basically, again, we are talking about the KMP part here. Nature of the client's operations, including its business practices. Now, when you talk about business practices, this is again important. See, in terms of the SOPs the company is following. Yeah. Once you get to understand the business practices, you'll get to understand as to whether any sort of risk is involved over there or not. So that's why if you were to obtain an understanding, you'll get into the operations, including the practices as around the business. Means the way they function. Let's suppose if they are not really interested in having agreements, so that reflects poorly. So you will get to know the way, the approach which the company has been following. Yes or no? So that's all about the business practices which the company will generally be following. So it will give you good insights, basis which this evaluation is going to be easier. Information concerning the attitude of clients, principal owners, KMP, TCWG, such as, let's suppose there are some matters. Okay. So what do you find? You find that the company has taken aggressive positions at most of the places. Yeah. When you talk about the internal control environment, you find that the company is not really strong as far as the control framework is concerned. So what will happen? You will get to know about the risk which is involved. Whether the client is aggressively concerned with maintaining the firm's fee as low as possible. Again, a very important factor. Indications of an inappropriate limitation in the scope of work. If that is the case, that can have a huge impact on the outcome, right? Outcome of the audit that you perform. Why? Because the moment you bring in the limitation, what will happen? Quality is going to get impacted. If let's suppose the client is involved in any sort of illegitimate activities, so that will be reflective of what? Integrity. Right? Again, something which is going to be an important consideration. The reasons for the proposed appointment of the firm and non-appointment of the previous firm. That's how also you will generally get to know about them as to what is it they are really trying to look into and what is it that they want to really focus upon. Yeah. So I'll come back to this set of questions. I think in the meantime, what we can also do is, let me just move on to some of the questions from RTP first. So what I'll do is I'll just pick up this RTP and then we'll come back. So as the time permits. So let me just move on to this RTP for May 26. Okay. Right. So there we go. Okay. Yeah. So let's look at this one. So this is the one for May 26. Yeah. So let's look at this. Messrs. KRM and Associates. It's a firm of chartered accountants. Okay. So they are the statutory auditors of Velocity Engineering and Projects Limited. It's a listed company which is engaged in execution of large scale infrastructure projects under EPC. Okay. Across India, they are also operating outside India. Yeah, so basically they are into EPC contracts. Now, firm has an experienced partner designated as EQCR for listed entity audits. So this is what the firm has done. So they have designated a partner, and the partner is decently experienced. So that appears to be the case basis, the understanding that we have. Okay, and for the listed companies audit, do they need the EQCR? Answer is yes. They will need the EQCR. Now, during the audit for the year ended 31st March 25, engagement team noticed following matters. So these are the matters which the engagement team has noticed. Now, please understand it's all about audit. Yeah. So these are the audit matters that we are looking at. Yeah. And what do you mean by audit matters? Means these are audit issues. You can say audit observations. Yes or no? Revenue of rupees 1,250 crores recognized under long-term EPC contracts using percentage of completion method based on cost to cost input method under Ind AS 115. So that seems to be the revenue which they have recognized. Significant variation claims and escalation clauses were included in the transaction price. Okay, so that's what you find. Okay, this was based on management's assessment of high probability of recovery. Yeah, so this is what you can observe. Next, impairment testing of investments in step down foreign subsidiaries executing overseas EPC contracts, where the cash flow projections were based on aggressive assumptions about the future contract terms. So this is your second observation. Third, disagreement between the senior member of the audit team and engagement partner regarding the inclusion of variation claims as part of the transaction price, with the senior member recommending that some consultation needs to be obtained. Yeah. Now, whether that is really required or not, so that's a matter of discussion. Next, firm didn't have internal infrastructure specialists. See, at times when you audit some companies, okay, which have a peculiar business requirements, so particularly for the large companies, particularly for some of these peculiar businesses, what do you find? To understand some of the requirements of the business may not be easy. Why? Because they may be very peculiar, which you will not find every now and then. And if you are not able to understand the business properly, you may not be able to audit that properly. Yes or no? Because maybe you are not able to then perform the procedures or design the audit procedures, or maybe your understanding is limited, so that's why you are not able to understand the perspective of the company which they may have applied And that's why you may get into a situation wherein there is a conflicting view, because the company has done it right, but because your understanding is limited, so that's why you're thinking that what they have done is not right. Yeah, so that sort of situation may arise. So that's why at times you get to see, particularly in case of large companies wherein the industry or the business is quite specific, peculiar, industry experts are involved. Yeah, so when you say industry experts, so we are talking about the auditors expert. So they happen to be the part of what? Engagement team only. So they are going to support the engagement team in terms of understanding the business, evaluating some of the requirements of the business as far as the impact on the financial statements are concerned. So thereby you can say they happen to be what? They happen to be the expert of the auditor. Yeah. So that's the role in a way they are going to play. However, in the given situation, internal infrastructure specialists were not involved, but external consultation was obtained and the matter was resolved with formal documentation of consultation process. Okay. EQCR was informed about the audit, but review was conducted only at a summary level. Detailed evaluation of significant judgments relating to revenue recognition impairment was not done. Okay. Means some of the key areas which are required to be looked at specifically by the EQCR, wherein the EQCR needs to focus upon. So when you don't inform EQCR, how will the EQCR get to know? They are not involved in audit the way the EP or the engagement team is doing. Right? So they are going to be selective in terms of what is required to be looked at. And it's the responsibility of the engagement team to let the EQCR understand that and of course get into the details of that. Right? Audit report was signed before the completion of formal EQCR documentation. Wherever there were differences of opinion, as we just found, so those were not formally documented or so on. So that's what we have also. So working papers contain general review notes, but no detailed documentation evidencing the depth of consultation or completion of objective EQCR procedures prior to the issuance of audit. Obviously, the way the EQCR seems to have been performed, it clearly shows that something seems to be missing. You are required to examine the compliance with the requirements relating to engagement performance, number one, consultation, number two, EQCR. Means if let's suppose you were to look at it from the perspective of what the SQC requires. So these are the three areas. So I think the question has given you the context. See, ideally what should have happened? This context you should have picked up and you should have therefore answered that according to some of these requirements. But I think because the case scenario was quite big, covered a lot of aspects, so that's why some of these things have been already included for your purposes by the question itself. So the question has specified. So I think your life seems to be a bit easier in such a situation. Yes or no? So now let's look at this. In the given case, auditor is required to examine the compliance with requirements related to engagement performance, of course, consultation, yes, EQCR, yes, of course. See, these are what? These are nothing but the elements which are there in the SQC. So are these required to be looked at? Yes, they are required to be looked at. When you talk about engagement performance, so what do you include there? First, consistency in quality of engagement performance is achieved through the briefing of engagement teams of their objectives. So you can say whenever you go audit, there will always be a process. So for example, obtaining an understanding, passing on that understanding to the engagement team, or making sure they understand that when you go interact with the client, when you also have internal discussions, which is all about planning. Once the planning is done, when you get on to the execution, so what do you do? Some of those procedures you have drafted in line with the professional standards. You will apply them. Processes of engagement supervision will have to be followed. Training on the job at times it may be required. Review of performance or of the work which is involved. So that is also required to be performed. Appropriate documentation of work performed. Again, an essential element in such a scenario. In the given scenario, it appears complex and high-risk areas such as revenue recognition, impairment of overseas investments were involved. But adequate documentation and supervision procedures were not evidenced. See, for the critical areas, what do? You will, of course, focus more on that. So this is something which you'll call as significant risk area. For significant risk area, your focus is going to be higher, your testing is going to be higher, and that has to be reflecting in the documentation, which doesn't seem to be happening in the given scenario. Yeah, which is a clear miss. Next, when you talk about consultation, so it's required to be obtained. So wherever there is any sort of contentious matter, critical matter, so it needs to be put in place, right? Internally, externally doesn't matter. Important thing is there has to be a mechanism for doing that. In the given case, disagreement existed with the engagement team member and the engagement partner. And the firm clearly lacked a mechanism to resolve the conflict. So that's why what did they do? They obtained external confirmation. So the matter got resolved. No documentation of this consultation process was maintained. Yeah. So if let's suppose any consultation is done, so that has to be the part of the documentation. That's how the engagement has been completed. So that has to be reflected therein. Moving on to this EQCR, again a very, very important element of the engagement performance, you can say. Of course, part of SQC, but very, very important element and a mandate. In the given case, what has happened? Although the firm had EQCR, but it doesn't seem to be performed in a true sense. Some of the things which are required to be discussed or informed to him. So what will happen? Quality control, that will be compromised significantly. So the whole objective of EQCR on the engagement gets defeated if the EQCR is not able to do what is required to be done. Yes or no? Yeah. All right. So with this, we are through and we can just close our discussion now. Thanks, everyone. Ashok, we can close now. Yes.